All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jessel Noor. I'm the um, Democracy Cohort Manager at Solutions Journalism Network. I'm one of the trainers that brings you the Advancing Democracy Fellowship. We're really excited to host this AMA for our application process, which is open until January 19th. We'll post all the links in the chat. But the main thing we wanted to share is that we are excited for this year. This is our third year of the fellowship. And today we have an opportunity to learn about the fellowship and to hear about the fellowship from three of our outstanding participants from 2023, and as well an opportunity to hear from Sue Robinson from the University of Wisconsin-Madison about her research into our fellowship. So we have some stories about what folks have been able to accomplish by implementing the skills and strategies we learned through the fellowship, and also the academic research that goes along with it to add some emphasis on everything you're going to hear today. So we're going to start with a quick activity. Um, so I'm asking everyone to respond to a prompt, and I'm going to share my screen in a second. But that is the prompt, and I'm going to share my screen. All right. So the prompt is, what are the major challenges journalists face while covering the 2024 election? So everyone can just take a second. Just take a second. You can scan this QR code or use the link I put in the chat and just answer this question in one or two words. What are the major challenges journalists face while covering the 2024 election? I'm asking this question because this is really the reason we're all here, that this is a momentous election happening this year, and it's going to be a really challenging one for journalists to, no matter what outlet you're with or no matter what your position is, if you're in journalism, this is going to be a tremendously challenging year. And at Advancing Democracy, we don't have all the answers to how to make this, give you all the answers you need to make this easier to cover, but we do have some evidence-based strategies that can help newsrooms covering this election. And that's what we're really excited to share with you. So I'm seeing Trump, which is emphasized here, overwhelmed voters, polarization, hostility, division, mistrust, lack of interest, not being trusted, divisiveness, audience burnout, resources, lack of staffing. We can't solve all these problems for you, but we can certainly help with a lot of them. And so we're going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. But yeah, thank you for doing this. Obviously, these are huge challenges, and we are going to talk about how we can challenge a lot of them. All right. 1 second. All right. Right. All right. So as we know, the media is facing, as we just heard, we're facing a lot of a lot of challenges. We saw trust, we saw polarization, and horse race coverage. The focus on politicians at the expense of focusing on communities. That is a huge challenge that the media faces. And that's something that the fellowship, the Advancing Democracy Fellowship, seeks to provide an alternative to, and resources and trainings with Hearken, Trusting News, and Solutions Journalism Network. Before we get started and you hear more about the program and from the coaches and the participants, we put together a brief video which will give you a look at what we accomplished last year. So we're going to watch this video real quick, and I'm going to make sure that I am sharing my audio, which I believe okay, there we go. All right.
We're in a moment where future generations of journalists will operate on the ethics that we have developed in response to this moment. That we're in the Watergate, in the McCarthy, in the Pentagon Papers era of our time.
We always talk about how this type of work, solutions reporting, these in-depth stories that are focused on the audience, how that, for some reason in our heads is like the enemy of like good clicks and like good views and revenue-driven coverage. And what I feel like we found is that doing this work, solutions journalism, trusting news, engagement reporting, citizens agenda, they all are great for engagement and for views and getting more people interested in your coverage, actually.
Something that we learned is not do the horse race thing that we used to do just because we were always reacting to the news. And we have been working really hard on prepping a plan for next year election coverage in Arizona and in Mexico at the same time, and trying to debunk misinformation that we are getting spread.
Because our team is very small and we have limited resources too, we find this program very, very useful and allow us to learn and to experiment with these new skills and insights. We apply, it could be for the first time in a formal way, the solution framework, and we were able to produce a story about a solution that a family of asylum seekers get to have permanent housing, which is a huge problem in this city and in others. That is something that makes us very proud.
We don't always have the time and the resources to plan ahead this early. And so we have this great, long list of stories that we plan to do that's really just kind of a roadmap to let us know, who we need to be talking to, when we need to be talking to them, that sort of thing. So we're really proud of that.
Next year, it used to seem really scary, and it doesn't seem so scary anymore because we have a plan. So I think the training worked.
And a shout out to all of our incredible fellows from last year. And many of them are actually on the call, and you'll be able to ask them questions and hear from them and how they made these progress. And again, these are newsrooms facing the same challenges that you are all facing, and they have found a way to make some progress, to make some inroads, to tackle some of these challenges. And so that's why we're so excited about this opportunity. Really quick, what exactly does this fellowship involve? It's 9 months. It's focused for US-based newsrooms that can really commit one reporter and one editor for these 9 months from February to October. We're going to end before the general. Don't worry, we won't draw you into any meetings right before the general. But we want newsrooms that are willing to try something new, to try something different. And even if these are skills that you're familiar with, we want you to really commit to implementing these skills in your newsroom, and really center communities instead of politicians in how you frame and decide your coverage. We require at least one reporter and one editor to take part in the program. We understand that things happen, people go on maternity leave, there's vacations, there's other challenges, but this does require a bit of time on your part, a time commitment. And in exchange, we're going to offer a ton of coaching, a ton of resources, and connect you with the opportunities you need to get your reporting to the next level and to really make these impacts. And the goal of this time isn't to give you more work. But understanding you have limited resources, how can you work better? How can you work more effectively? And the other great thing about this fellowship is that it gives you a chance to connect with other newsrooms facing those same challenges and learn from each other and really build a community and a network of practice in learning from each other during this critical time, which is going to be really helpful, especially as we get into the heart of this election. So we have several partners in this. Hearken, with Jen Brandel. Jen, do you want to come off mute for a minute and just introduce yourself and talk about engaged elections and the work that you do with advancing democracy?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here and having the third year of this fellowship. We've learned so much from the last two. So whoever's in this next cohort benefits from all of that learning and that structure in an election year. So Hearken, we help newsrooms go from really assuming the public or assuming they know what the public wants in their elections reporting to humbly asking the public, what do you want? What questions do you have? And specifically, we teach a model called the Citizens Agenda approach, which you may have heard about. Jay Rosen, a media critic, has been advocating for it for decades, and it's finally catching hold. And the Citizens Agenda approach is really about focusing your election coverage on the people who are electing, so the electorate, rather than the people who are campaigning. So rather than focusing on what folks running for office are saying they're going to do or whatever agenda they have, you're focusing on what questions do the public have for those candidates so that they can be accountable and that the public's agenda is actually the one in charge rather than the politicians and whoever's funding them. So it's a really great model. It's really engagement journalism applied specifically to elections. And we found tons of great results from partners who've been doing this approach over years. And I'm happy to say, they say there's no going back once they shift it. So really helps them get away from horse race coverage of just reporting on, the polls and the odds of winning, and gets to the stakes of what's at stake in these elections. So excited to be here and excited to be facilitating for next year.
Yay. All right, Joy, do you want to go next and talk about Trusting News for those?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Hi, everyone. At Trusting News, we stand in the gap of trust between audiences, between the public and journalists, really helping them understand each other. So we help journalists center their work in what we know about what frustrates people about journalism and what people who feels seen and reflected and well served by journalism and who does not. And then we understand what the public doesn't know about journalism so that journalists can be empowered and equipped to explain that. And what specifically focus on elections, it's so interesting what journalists take for granted often about their mission, their process, their ethics, the goals of election coverage, how they make decisions, how they work to be fair and independent, what that even means, that often goes unexplained. So I am thrilled to be part of this fellowship for another year. We specifically related to elections, there's just a lot that we're learning about what disenfranchises people from journalism and what journalists can do about it.
Thank you. And Linda, I don't think we have a representative of Good Conflict, but if you want to talk about SJN and Good Conflict briefly, even though you're not a member of Good Conflict, but.
Yeah, I can talk about both of those briefly. And, we've just learned in partnering together with Hearken and Trusting News, we've just learned that as important as each of these skills is individually, they're much more powerful when combined together. And we're seeing more and more of that in the newsrooms that have gone through this fellowship. In particular, after you find out what's most important, humbly ask what's most important to your community. We see in particular solutions journalism as one really important tool for how to use that information. Not just continuing to tell people, yeah, there's issues. Yeah, we know you care about them, but taking a solutions focused approach by looking at how we might solve this. What are some examples from elsewhere that seem to be making progress, and all the elements that go into strong, rigorous solutions journalism. Good Conflict, I wish they were here today. They were able to be here today. They're an organization that has produced a curriculum that also came from Amanda Ripley's book, Good Conflict, and teaches journalists how we can avoid adding to the polarizations that exist, and getting beyond the he said, she said, and the kind of the polarizing rhetoric to really help our audiences better understand themselves. And Jen and Joy chime in here if I'm, or Jessel, if I'm missing anything here. But they teach some really excellent skills for how to do that.
Once
Yeah,
my
so
eyes were
thank-
opened to how good how journalists fuel conflict and benefit from conflict, I won't ever be able to unsee that. It's really a powerful framework.
So yeah,
And-
that's it, Jessel. Just want to say we're really excited you're here and interested, and please ask all your questions. Eager to hear them.
Yes, please. This is a Q&A. We have a lot to share, but we also want to get to everyone's questions. So please enter them in the chat. And we had one about whether this recording will be made available. Absolutely. An email will go out to everyone who's signed up for this with the application link, a link to the recording, and any other materials we mentioned today. And yes, in summary, this is a really unique, one-of-a-kind opportunity where we're providing all of these skills together and really showing you how they can work together to really counter a lot of the challenges that journalism face right now, and that we know we will face this year, right? The challenges are going to feel overwhelming, but we have created a community where we can come together and make progress against those challenges. So this is really unique. It's not just us saying it. We all have some of our participants from last year's fellowship, which just ended, to talk about their own experiences. And you heard some of that in the little video we produced, but we're going to hear from 3 of them that kindly took times out of their day to share a little bit. And so we're going to start with the CAP Times. And they shared that some of their solutions-focused stories based on engagement, built through transparency, were some of the top, traffic stories leading up to the end of the year last year when they were published then. And that's the CAP Times. Anthony Shoemaker, Ohio Bureau Chief of USA Today, did a really fantastic job implementing many of these skills for Ohio's major referendums that happened last year, and really took a fresh approach and had really exciting results on not just talking about what the politicians are saying, but deeply engaging with their audience. And we know that news avoidance is a huge problem right now, and this is an answer to it. Engage with the audience, understand what the audience wants, be transparent with the audience, and give them the information they need to be informed citizens in this democratic process. And we also have WUWM 89.7 FM in Milwaukee that did a really fantastic job. And you heard from Michelle, who is a news editor there, leader there. And Michelle, we heard a little bit about from you during the video, but thanks for taking time to talk to us today. Talk a little bit about your experience with the fellowship. We heard you say in the video that this 2024 field really daunting and overwhelming, but now you have a plan. What impact did that make for you coming into this year?
It's hard to put it in words because it is so huge. I think Linda really kind of got to the heart of it. Is we have these tools through this training, but all these tools coming together, it kind of creates like this magical mixture. So we're really thinking about like engagement at the heart, and like maybe the starting point for all the election coverage that we're doing this season. So I shared a link in the chat, but we have this page on our website, and we have promos running on air, and we have stuff on social, and this page shares our mission for how we are going to cover the election. It has an FAQ, so it kind of answers like, so how are you making decisions? And then lets people know that we want to hear from them. And I was just looking at the survey ahead of this, because our goal for this year in 2024 is to get 300 responses to the survey to help us, like, how are we going to morph our coverage around it? And we already have 215 responses, so I think we're definitely going to have to like increase our goal. But that's kind of like our starting point, is making sure we're listening And then that kind of builds into what solution stories can we do? How can we build trust in the news that we're doing? When we interview a candidate, can we put it through like a good conflict lens to make sure that we're getting the candidate to speak, to get away from talking points and kind of really talk about like how they came to stand on the issues and where they stand. So I can't speak more highly of the training, and it is deeply, deeply impacting kind of all that we do when it comes to elections in Milwaukee.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And Michelle can stay on if you have questions for her specifically, but she dropped this link in the chat, which is that page she was talking about. And so you can see, you know, they're asking for input so we can tailor election coverage around what you have to say. And then you have this fabulous Q&A, you know, about how to get involved and how your newsroom operates, which is fantastic, right? How do you build trust? This is one of those ways. How do you fight polarization? You know, you've talked about all of those, addressing all those challenges that we brought up. Fantastic. And we have some questions coming in the chat, and we'll, you know, our coaches are going to respond to them as they come, and then we'll talk about them more towards the end. All right. Up next, Duncan Agnew from Evanston Roundtable, and you heard Duncan in the video as well. Duncan, thanks for joining us today. And can you talk a little bit about what you learned? You know, you mentioned, and we see this quote we put up from your final grant report, but you mentioned how there's, you know, you found a false binary between doing engaged, you know, transparent, community-oriented reporting, and the belief that that doesn't lead to traffic, it doesn't lead to engagement. But you found something different. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I just want to say, you know, this is a fantastic fellowship. Like Michelle, I just can't recommend it enough for every newsroom. And, you know, this
we did not pay them to say that, just so it's clear. We did not pay them.
And, you know, I've seen some of the questions in the chat coming in about, you know, hyper local focus, and just to give you a sense, you know, I cover Evanston, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. So I'm, you know, hyper local community journalism. And, you know, there's a ton that you can do in this fellowship focused on community journalism. And along these lines that you know, we were talking about engagement and how that kind of connects with, you know, driving viewership and driving trust in your newsroom. And I really do think that on a hyper local level, this is even more impactful because it really creates a model for, you know, how your newsroom wants to interact with your community, how you want to reach other parts of your community that you traditionally may not. And it's provides a real framework, I think, for engaging on a deeper level through focus groups, through meetings, through surveys, tabling at community events, things like that, where you're going beyond, you know, traditional reporting where you stick a microphone in someone's face and say, who are you voting for? You know, this is much deeper in the sense that you are gaining a better perspective of what are the issues that really matter or really are going to matter during an election cycle or in an off election cycle, you know, social issues that matter to these people. And I think it really does, there is a false binary, because I think doing all of that work actually leads people to coming back to you. It leads you to get better tips from people in the community. It leads to more stories, more trust. You get more submissions for letters to the editor and things like that if you have a robust kind of community section on your website. So I really do think that all of this is not the enemy of, you know, clicks. If anything, it leads more people to being involved and actually trusting you and possibly supporting you, donating to your news organization. So I think it makes a huge difference.
And thank you so much, Duncan. It was great working with you this year. And you know, we've seen we'll directly address all the questions in the chat in just a few minutes. So thank you for sharing those. But we've seen questions about what the focus is of the fellowship. The focus is really whatever you want to make it, right? We're going to help you reach your goals. We're going to help you identify goals, build a plan to reach those goals and do it. It's really, we're not telling you how to do any of this. Okay, we're not being prescriptive here. We just want to empower you and give you strategies and support and coaching for you to do, for you to achieve what you're trying to do. So thank you. All right, La Raza, Jesus Del Toro from La Raza in Chicago. Jesus, thanks for joining us. And yeah, you found some really interesting results by doing by being part of the fellowship. And for those that don't know, La Raza is a community-based Spanish language newspaper in Chicago. So you are provide a unique perspective in this fellowship. Can you talk a little bit about what you found and what impacts you saw through the fellowship in your newsroom?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, for us was very important to learn and to identify different ways to do things that we or didn't know about that, or believe that we're like too much, or that we don't have enough resources to do it, or that doesn't apply to us because we are very local. We had some misconceptions initially that fortunately we were able to focus on what we truly want to do, and we were empowered by the techniques, that the strategies, and the insights that we receive. And I think that is the most important thing in our case, because, for example, we apply for maybe the first time the Solution Journalist Framework to stories that serve us to as a base to do more in-depth solutions journalists later in this year. And that was very important, because if you try and you experiment and sometimes you won't be able to do that perfectly at the first time. We didn't do it, properly or correctly at the beginning, but then we were able to develop ourselves, and that was very important. Of course, with the solutions perspective, but also with others, because, for example, as mentioned, the engagement part of this program is very important, because we learned that our community, in many cases, know more about what they want to hear about elections than what we can, imagine or decide by ourselves. There is one question in the chat about how to localize national elections. I think that the one great way is to ask the community, what they want to know about the national election, what they want to do to know more about what is going on with the major candidates, with the major parties, with the things that are, in the national discussion. And also identifying strategies to better understand, for example, the problem of polarization, the problem of conflict, the problem of distrust in news. All of that was for us in many ways enlightened with the techniques and skills that we receive, because in many ways, when you are a local outlet with limited resources and many things to do with a very small staff and great expectations and the same, and great enthusiasm at the same way, sometimes you say, well, I cannot do that. Then the motivation and the push that this program provided us was very relevant and very, something that we will keep, taking advantage of in the coming months and years. And yeah, in this slide, we did some audience research with help from Northwestern University here in Chicago. And when we presented the stories that we did about elections or politicians talking to the community and other issues, all of our participants said that they prefer the stories with the perspective of the community, not just politicians talking, as we did a lot in the past, to be sincere. Then we are now transitioning to more different ways to cover elections with the community in our first position, in our first row.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for fielding some of the questions that popped up, and we'll have we'll have more time to talk to you and ask about how you pull that off. That's really exciting at the end. All right, now so we've just heard from some of the newsrooms that have been part of this fellowship over the past year. And now we're going to get a different perspective on this fellowship. So Sue Robinson, who is a researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, just published shared some of her research she's found on actually looking at the impact of this fellowship over several years on newsrooms. Sue.
Hi everybody. Yeah, so I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and I've been working with a number of organizations, including SJN and Harken and Trusting News and Spaceship Media and some others, where we're trying to figure out as researchers, journalism studies researchers, like whether engagement journalism works. And I put a note in the chat about my book that came out this year, where I document this massive movement that at this point has a critical mass of newsrooms engaging in this sort of new sort of journalism that works to build audiences, expand into different kinds of demographic groups, and learning like how to do that. And so then we really want to figure out like, well, yes, this is happening in the industry, but how deep does it go, and is it effective, right? Are we actually building trust with people? And so we're starting to see a lot more research coming out that's looking at this. And this is what I've been doing with Advancing Democracy, the Advancing Democracy group, was we looked at the 2022 cohort of people, and now we're moving into the 2023 to look at, all right, what actually ended up happening? How did they use this training? Are the stories different, right? And then I'm also working with some quantitative researchers about like audience groups. And I'm also doing some focus groups with different newsrooms who went through this training into their community members that they're trying to get more of, right? So people who have been disengaged from their brand, and presenting to them, okay, well, they did this training, and they produce these new stories that they think are really transformed. What do you think of this, right? Because we know that, of course, all of the work that's being done doesn't get seen by a lot of the groups that you're trying to reach into. So your existing audience members love it, but it's not really helping you to expand your revenue base. And so that's what we're doing, is trying to bring this information to different kinds of community groups, and also really taking a look at the content. And so we just published this blog, and this is based on two reports that my research team did, looking at, first of all, did the training transform the practice? And we just saw, we did interviews with people, we did surveys with people. We also looked at all of the actual trainings themselves, like the sessions. And it was just unbelievable, the difference in the mindset of people who took this training. And I'm just going to echo some of some of the journalists were saying who had gone through this program, is that it's not just like one of those trainings where you train one person and then that person does really great things for 3 months, and then they leave and they go to some other newsroom or they go to PR, whatever they're doing. This is a training that really helps you integrate these different skill sets throughout the newsroom. And to me, that was one of the biggest changes that I saw in terms of like actual mindset. So they talk about, how do you deal with office politics when some of the people at the top are not fully on board with this new way of engagement journalism? Well, they help you with that. They help you figure that out. It provides a whole community of other people who are working at this, and it also makes sure that this work is going to be taught within the newsrooms, right? And so the quotes that I heard, we went back to people 6 months after the training had happened, so we could, because of course everybody ends the training and they're all gung ho, but then 6 months later, life happens. And they were still doing these different kinds of trainings, different kinds of journalism, right? That were either engagement oriented or transparent or solutions oriented. And people sort of picked what they wanted to build their skill sets on. They learn all of them, but a lot of people, and you do all of them throughout the training, of course. But then of course you're like always customizing to what your needs are. And the nice thing about this, they said, these people who told us, was that they had sort of this amazing group of experts who are helping them figure this out. So, right, we always talk about engage. You need to be engaged more with your constituents, and like, yeah, okay, you know, we already are engaged with them, but this takes it to a whole other level. And it also helps you figure out, what do I stop doing, right? What practices do we need to stop doing in order to have the capacity to these others? And to me, that's what is so pragmatic about this work. And again, they didn't, this is the research that we're seeing. And so then the work that we just finished was, all right, what about the journalism itself? And this is shared, right? Jessel, this is this graph that everybody can see here, this bar chart. We looked at more than 5,000 news articles from 2018, 2020, 2022, and 2024. Or sorry, not 2024 yet. We're going to do that soon. And we wanted to know, did the journalism actually change, right? Like, are we moving away from the game frames? Are we doing more solutions-oriented journalism? And we just found this out yesterday, that yes, indeed, of the news stories that we looked at, there was a giant difference between 2018 and 2022. In these newsrooms that trained in that early 2022 period. And we also know that it's significant for those of you who are statistically quantitatively, but what we found, a 28% increase in the number of stories that we could consider to have been practiced with an engagement focus. And I can talk more about how we'd identified that. And then as simultaneously a significant drop in how many, we call it horse race journalism, which is basically that game frame of the, who's winning, what's going on, and a huge uptick in issues-based stories. We looked at all, we hired a scraper to look at all of the political journalism. And we, of course, that involved a lot of like cleaning and stuff of the data, trying to get just at the political stories that were done by the staff of that particular news organization. But in addition to that, the 21 of the 22 newsrooms from the 2022 training also submitted 206 stories that they felt like were completely transformed. So we also looked at those and analyzed them. And just, I have to tell you that it's just a different kind of more relevant content that's happening, that also brought the content away from sort of these like super mired in problems and misinformation and all of that, and moved it more towards a solutions-oriented framework that can help these newsrooms help their communities make headway on significant like political problems that happen. And so I'm going to stop there, but I'm happy to take questions if people want to know more in the chat.
Thank you so much. So we are right on time and have the rest of our time together, these 20 minutes, just to take audience questions. We have coaches on the call. We have Sue Robinson on the call. We have these three journalists who just finished this fellowship last year on the call. So does anyone have a question you want to ask any of us? If so, feel free to put it in the chat. You can come off mute. Or you can DM me and I'll ask them as well.
There's a great question here by Sayaka, who asked, is it possible for very small newsrooms, like literally one editor and one reporter, to do this training successfully? So I'll kick it off and would love to hear from anyone else who wants to hear about it. Yeah, excited but worried about workload. Totally understand. What we want to make sure happens in this program is that you are able to commit the time If it were to be just you and a colleague that you're both able to commit the time, we really have found that having a decision maker and having a maker in the training helps tremendously. You don't have to translate what you learned over 90 minutes and all the revelations and insights and ideas you had to someone who's really busy and who's not going to have had the same information. And you can move much more quickly and much more effectively. So I do think it is possible. We've had it happen before, but you need to make sure that you're able to have the time commitment involved, and that everyone like mentally is committed to doing work differently, because it can be so hard when you don't have buy-in from either the person making or reporting or the person assigning and in charge. So if you're both excited about it and ready to do it and to replace some of the coverage you were planning on doing with this mode, that's great. Our goal is not to add to your workload, but to help you do better, more relevant, more useful journalism. But that does take a little bit of, strategy and processing and in between the meetings kind of homework. So anyone else, newsrooms or coaches, have anything on this very small newsroom front?
I'll jump in real quick. So I would say that one thing we talked about a lot during the fellowship was the fact that every single newsroom, large and small, it has limited resources. And one of the things that we're always tackling is how to prioritize, one story over another, and how do you make that decision? And that's one thing that we talked about, being transparent with our community about, when you post an FAQ on your website, for example, honestly saying, hey, like, we know that everyone wants us to do everything. We know that certain people are going to be passionate about certain topics and expect us to investigate those topics, but we have to, make a value judgment based on, the totality of the community, and kind of explain how you're doing that. But because of that, I would say that, every newsroom, like, you're already covering the stories that you cover. And so this is not necessarily, I would argue at least, adding work on top necessarily. It's just changing what the nature of the work, the framework of the work that you're doing already. And I think that is a really helpful way to approach it when you're thinking like, oh, this is another 90-minute meeting that I have to go to. This is another 3 stories that I have to write, X, Y, and Z. It's not really like that, because if you're already working on a story, for example, or you already have a topic that you've identified that you want to develop, then this is just a new way of helping you accomplish that in, I think, a more productive manner, especially focused on, we talk about solutions. If you want to cover, like, we spend a lot of time covering housing, for example, it just changed the framework of the housing stories that I probably would have already written and just made them better, I would say.
Fantastic. Yeah.
There's some
I'd like to
overlaps
jump in
between
on
that
this.
question and the one that Rich raised about just the scale and the scope of the coverage. So it's, Duncan, I love what you said initially about how every newsroom is struggling with bandwidth. I mean, I definitely hear that. I hear that from, there were newsrooms launching kind of statewide listening efforts and survey work and covering congressional campaigns. There were newsrooms really focused on very like neighborhoodish level elections. And every one of them is looking back at times where they had more staff or wishing they had more capacity. And so, our goal here is definitely not to tell you what you should be covering. It's just to say, how are you rooting the coverage you're doing in what is most useful to the people you aim to serve?
And feel free to let us know if that answers your question or not, if you're curious about that.
I was starting to answer Grace's question, but I realized that might be useful to everyone. And Jessel, I was betting you'd be a good person to address that one.
Oh, what was the
And that was
question?
around how many hours a week would be required for this fellowship?
Yeah, so think in our materials, we said about 8 to 10 hours a month. We would expect you to devote to the fellowship, and we'll have about 2 training sessions a month, which will last between about an hour or an hour and a half. And then we want you to have time to actually take what you've learned and actually implement it in your practice. And so that's the additional time and it might not be additional time, because it might just be it might just be part of what you do in your reporting or as an editor. And it might involve just sending out a survey, to sending out and sharing a survey where you're going to get engagement from your community. It might mean going to an event and talking to folks, so it's not, we're not giving you any additional work, like just homework for the sake of it. We want to help you think about these issues, help you plan some of these issues, and come up with a strategy, and also to ask us questions as they come up. Like, we'll be available for coaching as well. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so great question about the timeline for announcing who gets chosen. I'm going to look that up, and I'm going to pull that up right now and get back to you. But give me one second. But yeah, if other folks have questions or want to weigh in, please.
I was just going to kind of build off what you said, Jessel, and combine it with Drew's question about previous fellowships focused on elections. So we were part of it last year. We did have a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, but when we were going through the training, we really didn't have any active elections going on. So it was really focused on democracy and how to have people who are in our community audience feel like they better understand like the systems that are in place around them. But I think doing this fellowship in an election year makes it very easy to like complete the homework that's assigned, because then you're producing election content for your audience. So I think it's kind of like a really nice time to participate in, because elections are already on your mind, and this is just kind of giving you the tools of like, so what should we be doing right now? So yeah, so previous ones we kind of, for us, expanded outside of elections and was more of like politics and democracy, but I could see it being 2024. When you come to do the homework, you're going to have elections stories that you need to do. So.
Fantastic. So we are going to, so the deadline is January 19th, and we're going to take just a week to choose the newsroom. So we'll have those selections announced by January 26th, I believe. Although that date's not set in stone, but around the end of the month, we will let everyone know.
If anyone has looked at the application in more depth and has any questions specifically, like feel free to ask as well. You can also reach out to Jessel or any of us coaches for specific questions when you're filling out the application. We do also recommend that you fill it out with the folks who you plan on doing this training with, because there are a few questions about, what do you want to change and why, and just getting on the same page about that before suddenly you might get in and then your colleagues are like, wait, what are we doing? Is a good idea. So the application is meant to also inspire some newsroom contemplation, reflection, and conversation. So it shouldn't just be completed by one person. You can make a Google Doc too if you want, just to put all of your answers together and then one person submit it, but we recommend it being a conversation starter.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things that we do in this fellowship. We come together and we think about these issues and deliberate and try to see, what we can do, what we can do to reach our goals, and just even identifying those goals can be really powerful. I'm seeing that most of these questions are being answered as they come along, so a question about, we have questions about the stipend. So it's $5,000, it goes to the newsroom, but it's to be spent towards fellowship related activities. And it's really kind of flexible how you spend it. Many newsrooms spend it on staff time, attending the meetings and doing the work. But we've had newsrooms do engagement events, or I think a couple of years ago, or even last year, probably spend some of that money in doing engagement and having a little extra cash to do that they wouldn't have otherwise. And in terms of university licensees, we definitely have, WUWM and several other KUNR. So if you have specific questions, we can get you answers to those, or Michelle can also answer the questions too, because she's able to work around. She's able to make it work. And you will get an email from me with the recording and the other resources, Sue's blog post, some of the data she shared, and these other resources. You will get all that in an email from me later today. And I'll also include the email of the coaches. And if it's okay, the other speakers here will get their permission first. But if you have questions for them specifically, you'll be able to reach them. These are really great questions, which you'd expect from a Zoom room full of journalists. So we have a few minutes left together. Are there, any more questions or anything any of us want to discuss more? We have some time now.
I saw it in the chat, but I thought it was worth underscoring to the whole group is that coaching is a part of this as well. And that's the part, to the general questions about, can this be on, election policy or focus on, whatever focus you want to take. There is coaching available to help you tailor that to your mission and what you'd like to accomplish with this fellowship. So that's a really important part of this fellowship as well.
I know one question that I've gotten before is, I'm sorry, Jessel.
No, go ahead.
Silly Zoom. I'm so tired of talking over people. One question I've gotten a lot is I know there are folks on this call who have engaged in the past with training from some or all of Harkin and Solutions and Trusting News work. This is really very focused on elections and democracy and policy coverage. And it's also focused on the overlap between these three programs. So feel free to check in with us. We definitely don't want you to feel like you're duplicating anything. It's possible you might hear some ideas that you've heard in the past, but it's really a unique combination of skills that I think is the genius and beauty of this fellowship.
Yeah, does anyone want to share their experience with coaching? Because as we mentioned, that can be a really powerful tool, because not only are you doing the trainings, but you're gonna have time to get one-on-one help with the experts we've gathered here. So I've found that rewarding for me as someone that does some of the coaching. I found that it's really fun, and I've learned a lot from it. But do any of the journalists here want to share their experience? Good or bad?
I would say we were assigned a coach, but that doesn't mean the other coaches are off limits. So I know when we were working on a solution story, we're like, okay, Linda, we want to spend some time with you and just kind of like pick your brain. So found it to be really helpful, especially when we're like in the middle of the story and weren't quite sure which way to turn. So it's nice just having those resources. But I would also say, I feel like we've established good relationships. So even though the fellowship has ended, I still have all of your contact information. So there's no getting rid of the people who participated in previous fellowships.
And I
And
want
we
to
have a
say
Slack
that.
channel too. So
Thank you. No, sorry. I want to say that, of course, the coaches were great, but also was very important the other members of the cohort, because the discussions that we have about the topics, about our own mission, our own resources or lack of resources, about the way we resolve something, and hearing from the others the same thing was very, very important, and for ourselves and for all the others, I believe. And that is something very interesting about this fellowship too, that We have a diverse cohort in terms of many types of media, no print, broadcast, radio, web only, digital only. There are many different, in different languages for many states. Then that was something that was very enriching, in addition to all the great insights and coaching and the work that we were able to do during the fellowship.
I'll also just add, as a coach, you can come to us not only with editorial questions, but also like internal culture and politics questions. I've had a lot of coaching sessions that end up about, hey, my boss signed up for this, but still asking me to do everything the usual way. What do I do? Or I'm looking to, put my career more in this direction. How do I apply these things to the type of reporting I really want to do, even if it's not in this newsroom? So just know, we're not a substitute for therapists, but we can help with more than just the traditional, here's how I want to construct the story, or what's my distribution or audience stuff. We can also help with the hard things that sometimes prevent newsrooms from being able to institute the changes that they really do want to institute. So coaching goes in all directions. We're really here to serve whatever your needs are.
Yeah, and we can help with buy-in. We can help out with that. If you're having a challenge, we're happy to take a crack at that. And to Jesus's point, we've had multiple collaborations and projects come out of the fellowship where two newsrooms started working together on their own beyond what the fellowship facilitated. So that is, we have consistently found that is one of the most valuable aspects of this, just having that community, especially in an election year when it's going to feel very lonely for a lot of us that are out there doing this work. And a place where you can come to and have a really find support and find the advice you need and find how other people are tackling these challenges. So we're just about out of time, but thanks to everyone. Thanks to our panelists and coaches who took time out. Thanks to Sue Robinson as well for talking about some of her fantastic research. If you signed up for this, if you're on this call, you'll get an email from me in a little bit with the recording, the contact information for the folks here, and a link to the application, and some other resources that we want to share with you, and some exciting other opportunities we'll be announcing in the near future. So thanks everybody. Have a wonderful day.